welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Mary and today's video is going to be my reading stats for 2023. This is the third time that I've had to film this video. The first time I was off center in the frame, so I refilmed it. The second time I ran out of space, so I had to delete some stuff and it didn't capture the whole video. So now I'm filming it again. I think I've got it down now, so we'll see. This is going to be my stats video for 2023. I did not keep track of stats every single month like I try to normally do this year just because I just didn't. So I compiled things from Goodreads. I did the best I can, and let's just get into it. I read 147 books in 2023, which is 47 more than my Goodreads goal of 100. So that's pretty good. And that added up to about 52,623 books. I say about because Goodreads counted a book that I DNF'd as a book that I read. So I'll have to figure out how to go through and change that at some point. But right now it's saying that I read 148 books when I know I read 147 books. It is what it is. But the shortest book that I read in 2023 was The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, which was about 118 pages. And the longest book that I read was Moby Dick by Herman Melville, which was 720 pages. The average book that I read in 2023 was 355 pages, which I think is pretty standard for me. Most books that I read are between 300 and 400 pages. I don't really read books that are much bigger than that. I used to, I feel like, a lot, but not so much last year. Part of that is that I didn't really read as many epic fantasies. I didn't read as many like fantasy series books as I normally do. I don't think. I feel like I read an abnormal amount of non-speculative books this year. I'll just say that. The most shelved book that I read this year was Lord of the Flies by William Golding, which was shelved by 4,468,555 people on Goodreads. And the least shelved book that I read was Safe Word is Devil's Snare. I don't remember the author off the top of my head, but that is a fan fiction that was shelved by 474 people. My average rating this year was 3.8 stars, and I looked, and that was the same average rating I had last year. So that's interesting to me that I was like that consistent in the number of books that I liked, disliked, and loved, if that makes sense. I did a whole video a few months ago on how I rate my books, and I'll link it for you if you want to watch it. But essentially, the short of it is 1 star are books that I hated and should have DNF'd. 2 stars are books that I really didn't like and probably could have DNF'd. 3 stars are books that are fine. They're middle of the road for me. 4 stars are books that I liked, and 5 stars are books that I loved. That's a very short version. I am planning on doing a tier ranking of every book that I've given 3 stars because I feel like for me, there's the most variation in 3-star books because some 3-star books I look back and I'm like, God, I gave that 3 stars. I didn't really like it. And I'll tell people like, I wasn't the biggest fan of that. And then other books I give 3 stars, I'll tell people that I liked it, even though I only gave it 3 stars. So that's interesting to me, and I would like to explore it in a longer form video. The book with the highest rating on Goodreads that I read this year was The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan, which is the last book in the Percy Jackson series. It has an average of 4.59 stars on Goodreads, and I gave it 4 stars. And then the first book that I reviewed in 2023 was Club Dead by Charlaine Harris, which is the 3rd book in the Sookie Stackhouse series, and my review says, I'm sensing a love triangle. I'll leave you in suspense. That's a paranormal romance series that if you caught my series catch-up video for this year, I would like to continue in that series. Several of the books are on my 24 to read in 2024. So now with that out of the way, I'm going to go through and tell you how many books I gave each star rating this year. I did just want to point out that I reread 5 books this year, so I did count those in all of these stats that I'm talking about, just so you know. So if this is slightly different than things that I've said before, this is the only video that I've counted books that I'm rereading for stats. Hope that makes sense. So I gave 36 5 stars this year, 57 4 stars, 44 3 stars, 6 2 stars, and 2 1 stars. I also read 2 books that I didn't rate at all. One of those is the Anne Rule book that I read, and the other one, I can't remember what it was. But they were both nonfiction that I didn't rate. And again, that averages out to 3.8 stars, which is the same as 2022. I DNF'd 7 books this year. I don't rate books that I DNF, and I don't count them towards my stats. So nothing that I DNF'd is counted in any of these numbers. Like I said, there was a mix-up on Goodreads, so there is a book that I DNF'd in my total page count, but I'm not counting it for this. I hope that makes sense. The authors that I read the most books from this year, Neal Shusterman is number 1. I read 4 books by him. Part of that is that I reread the Scythe trilogy this year, and I read Gleanings. So that was the 4th book that I read by him. I also read 3 books by Erica Johansson because I read I read 4 books by Erica Johansson. Yay, I'm glad I refilmed this video. Because I read the entire Queen of the Tearling series and the prequel this year. So 4 books by Erica Johansson. Yay. 3 books by Rebecca Makkai, which I gave all of her books 4 stars that I read. I read I Have Some Questions for You, The Great Believers, and The 100-Year House. I read 3 books by J.R. Ward. I read the first 3 books in the Black Dagger Brotherhood series. 1 book I gave 3 stars, thought was fine, and then the second and third books I gave 5 stars because I absolutely loved them. I read 3 books by Ruth Ware. I believe I read The It Girl, which I gave 4 stars. The Death of Mrs. Westaway, which I gave 3 or 4 stars. That's my least favorite Ruth Ware that I've ever read. And then I read The Woman in Cabin 10, which I gave 5 stars. I loved that book. It kind of surprised me how much I liked it because I didn't know if I would, but I really, really liked it. So I think I like her slower paced books. It's something that I'm learning about myself. I read 2 books by Abby Jimenez. I read Part of Your World and Yours Truly, which are 2 books in the same standalone romance series. And I gave both of them 5 stars. I also read 2 books by Frederick Bachman. I read Beartown and A Man Called Ove, whatever. And I gave both of those 5 stars as well. And then I read 2 Bill Bryson books. I read A Walk in the Woods, which I gave 2 stars. And I read A Short History of Nearly Everything, which I gave 3 stars, which honestly could have been a 2-star. I don't know. I felt kind of meh about both of those books. To be honest with you, I have 1 more Bill Bryson on my TBR. It's like The Body, A Guide for Occupants, I think is what it's called. And I'm interested in reading that book. Bill Bryson gets so much acclaim for being like a great nonfiction writer, but I don't really like his books. So that's unfortunate for me. And then now we're on to genres. So the way that I divided my genres is I picked one genre that I feel like most encapsulates the book that I put in that genre. Books that I had a hard time categorizing, I kind of put in the general fiction category. So I have general/literary fiction, but I also have a second category for contemporaries because I feel like, to me, contemporary is different from like general fiction. And one of the differences is that I find contemporary easier to say what the plot is. Even if the plot is kind of meaningless, it's easier to give the setup for me than like a literary fiction book. So I hope that makes sense. But I did read a lot less genre fiction this year. 25 of the books that I read, that's the largest category, were general/literary fiction, which I was pretty surprised by. I also read 22 books that I would consider mystery and or thriller, 19 books that I would consider fantasy, 17 books that I would consider nonfiction, well, that are nonfiction. That also includes memoirs. I don't subcategorize nonfiction. 15 sci-fi books, 14 romance books, 10 historical fiction books, 8 classics, 8 contemporaries, 7 horror, and 2 poetry collections. And technically the poetry collections that I read, I could have classed differently. Like one of them could have been considered contemporary and the other one could have been considered fantasy, but I consider them poetry because to me that's its own category. So those are the stats that I kept track of this year. I am planning on keeping track monthly of reading stats going forward. So let me know in the comments if there are any stats that I did not cover that you want to see. I will tell you I am planning on keeping track of some author stats this year that I didn't cover in this video. So I'm hoping to do the number of BIPOC versus white authors that I read from, as well as male versus female authors that I read from. I also am planning on doing demographics. The reason I didn't calculate demographics for this, and I want to have a number for next year, but I don't really read that many things that aren't adult anymore. So I would say probably 12 to 20 books that I read this year were YA and less than 10 were middle grade. I think 5, I sort of did a count for myself, but I could be off by a couple. So just with that caveat, I don't read a ton of middle grade and I don't read a ton of young adult anymore, but that's not to say I won't going forward. I just mostly read adult books now. I'm 28, so it's like those are just the primary things that I'm interested in reading, but I do plan on keeping track of that next year. I also plan on keeping track of the like way that I'm reading books. So I want to keep track of whether I read something via ebook, audiobook, or physically, because I'm trying to read more physical books this year. All of the books that you see on the top shelf behind me are books that I own that I have not read yet, and I would like to read at least some of them physically, if not most of them. But physically reading is something I want to get back into because I love audiobooks, don't get me wrong, but I think I read probably 90 to 100 audiobooks last year and 50 physical books maybe, or 50 like physical or ebooks. So I would like to actually be reading more because it is something that I enjoy. I just don't always take the time to do it. So I hope that makes sense. But other than those, if there are categories that you want to see stats on, please feel free to let me know. I would be more than happy to add more stats to my reading journal spread that I have. But that's gonna be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching it. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you would like to see more videos from me, please subscribe to my channel because I do post 2 videos every week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!